talked about how the Aryans, came down, how they basically took over northern India, the Indus Valley, what have you, how they, claimed to create Hinduism and everything like that, about the whole caste system and how that was set up by the Europeans or the Aryans. And we got into all that information. Now, I want to get into, to start this off, basically the reason why they claim to have created Hinduism, and the attachment, the connection that the Aryans have with Hinduism, so to speak. So now this basically really goes back to Akhenaten, believe it or not. So Akhenaten's father was Amenhotep III, but his father-in-law was Tushratta. Now Tushratta was basically the king of the Mitanni tribe in Mesopotamia. So Mitanni in Mesopotamia, it's something that you're going to find a lot when you really start digging into this information. You'll hear about them. Now, the thing is, they don't know exactly what the Mitanni tribe was, what race they were. They believe they were mixed race. A lot of tribes back then was, of course. But the Mitanni tribe was a warrior tribe. And the whole thing with the Mitanni tribe and what they found in Mesopotamia is they found Indian gods. So they found Indra, Midra, and Varun. So when they found these deities in Mesopotamia, they are, of course, not Mesopotamian gods. So the thing is, they figured, well, the language that these gods was written in Mesopotamia was in an Indo-Aryan language. So they figured that the Indo-Aryans created it or wrote it because, it's dated so long ago. So, of course, this is many reasons why you could find Indian gods in Mesopotamia. It could be, Indians traveling to Kemet who stopped and wrote something down. The information that they're giving us can be completely bogus. There's a lot of different excuses and reasons why they could have found what they found. But when you understand about these gods and their aspects, and again, as I always say, they expect you not to do no research, then you can understand the truth about these gods. So you got to really look at language. And of course, when you start finding stuff language-wise, you can't always, if it's not the first language, you can't always trace it back to those people. You got to make sure, especially if they was travelers, that they didn't pick it up from somewhere else, because it could very well have been written by an Aryan person, by a white person. They could have written it, but they could have picked it up while they was in India. They could have picked it up on their travels from India to Kemet or to wherever. So these are things you got to take into context, and you can't just, this is one of the things they use to give the Aryans claim over Hinduism, but you can't just use stuff like this and just jump all over it and give them claim to a major, faith because of something like this. So now, the date of these writings about these Indian gods goes back to the 14th century BCE. Now, prior to that, we don't find any Aryan writings, of these gods, or really any type of gods. We don't find writings from Aryans about the gods that we know of. So, it's another reason why you can just kill that whole argument. And again, when these Aryans were traveling, it was picking up stories. And again, not all Aryans was in on conquest. Some of them was actually trying to fit in and just, start a family. Now, again, when you're doing your research and you start looking and finding these points or these civilizations or tribes where either the writer is saying we don't know the race, or they tell you straight out we don't know, the race of these people, or they was mixed race, or, Berber and stuff like that, the names they put out there, then this is, especially when it's pertaining to Mesopotamia and in that area, this is where you have the creation of the Persians and Arabs. Plain and simple. This is where you see that those races being created, because what's happening is, when you look at the area of the Persians, where the Persians was ruling at, you can see that this is basically the Indus Valley. This is what the Indus Valley was at. So you have, Mesopotamia, you have, of course, Afghanistan, you have Pakistan, you have northern India, and this was basically the Persian territory for a while. We know it encompasses the Indus Valley. So what was happening was these Aryans was coming down and mixing with the northern Indians and creating what we know as Persians and Arabs. Now, just like the Chinese, who don't want to be compared with the Japanese or the Koreans or what have you. You know, Persians don't like to be compared with Arabs and vice versa. But I mean, just like we could say with the Asians, come on, look at them. Y'all all look Asian. That's why we say Asian. They all look alike. It's the same thing with the Persians and Arabs. It's really hard to tell them apart unless you are Arab looking at an Arab or Arab looking at a Persian or a Persian looking at an Arab. You know, to kind of sort of know the difference. But for the most part, this is where it was created. You had different civilizations mixing them with Africans, mixing them with the Indians, the Aryans coming down, and it was just mixing and creating tribes. And this is why you find a lot, and they don't always like to point this out, of course. This is where you find a lot of these tribes that they can't describe what race they was. When they talk about the Hittites, who was the Hittites? There was a mixed race. You know, some people would just flat out say, well, they was black, mostly black. But then others would say like the Hyksos and the Hittites probably was a mixed race or predominantly black or something like that. This is where you have the creation of the Persians and the Arabs and them beginning their conquest. And eventually, you know, the Persians did create, you know, a vast empire that ruled, you know, for a long time. Of course, the Persians defeated the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, when they came into Kemet. So this is where all that stuff started. So when you start seeing that, you start to understand that this is all a part of the Aryans coming down, conquering in northern India, and basically just spreading out and really creating this agenda to take over. Now, you got to think about it. Even still, when you come down in a mixed race, and then it keep happening, and you have all these people, and then you have these tribes start forming. Of course, you know, they still gonna kind of feel like outcasts, like they need to start, you know, their own civilization as being mixed people, because, you know, before then, of course, Africans and then the Asians took over most of the lands, and we already set up civilizations. And all was left really was the hottest places nobody wanted to be, which you could say Mesopotamia, you know, the Middle East or what have you. So that's what they had left to basically take. And of course, the Aryans didn't want to stay up in the cold too much longer. They wanted to come down and basically take from the civilizations they had already established so much. So the Aryans was coming down and mixing with the civilizations. Remember, I talked about the Mani in my video on YouTube about the origins of all the races. And you can see the Mani, which is the indigenous people of Thailand. Remember, they had afros. Yeah, well, they still have afros. These people still exist to this day. When you look at these indigenous people, it's the same thing when you go to like Cambodia, you go to China and Japan, you have dark-skinned Asians still exist to this day, especially in Japan, especially in Thailand with the Mani, and they having afros. You can see it clear as day. You can see a lot of them look like black people, but we can see, you know, what happened when you look at the Thai people today and the Chinese and Japanese today. They have straight long hair because of the Aryans coming down and mixing in. Now, to me, when I researched this thing and looking at this whole thing, to me, this was a coordinated attack on melanin, which basically leads me to believe that at the top, you know, back then, they understood their deficiency. They understood their problem with melanin, and they basically wanted to weaken the rest of the world. They wanted to basically infect the rest of the world and decrease their melanin. And I'm going to explain later why this is important. And I'm going to explain later why them mixing in, you know, basically it's a good thing and a bad thing. But that's basically what they came to do. They came in, they weakened the people genetically weakened them and made them, you know, less melanin, which melanin is a major thing. So when you understand that, I mean, think about that. From the woolly hair, the blackness, the representation of power, melanin, into, you know, the straight hair. So that's basically what took place. To me, it was something that they had to understand and know. Now, and they did this because, you know, they wanted to basically get in power. And once they got in power, we seen the disappearance of the black gods from the ancient world. Remember, they're gone. They got rid of them. And we're seeing the rise of these, you know, white gods, these unseen gods. And, you know, when you look at Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and Vishnu, when you look at Jehovah, Yahweh, Yahweh, all that, these are all gods that's here to basically cover up the black gods, to hide the black gods, to reduce them to a level of secrecy that you can only discover their true origins and identity in secret societies. And it's basically what took place. It's basically what happened. You had all these governments basically get in on this because they themselves are in these secret societies and want to rise up in ranks. So they had to do their part. And again, you have to understand that one ruler at the top, he only think about himself. There is no way you can have one man representing an entire kingdom and not have a set of rules that's basically going to really govern him and limit his power as far as the effect he can have on the entire kingdom. You can't get that power to one person. But when you look at a president and people that had this power to do so much, I know we got a Senate and what have you, but the president has executive orders, so he can basically do what he wants. So these people, these rulers have basically sold their people out. And that's going to make a lot of sense later. They sold them out. So you had these people, the Aryans come down, mix in, weaken the nations, and basically leave, because the more melanin they had, the more stronger, the more tough they would be to conquer and fight. And they understood this. Somebody at the top understood this. I'm telling you, when you do the research, you're going to understand that. So they basically wanted to weaken them. They want them to not understand that this is about melanin, that this goes back to the black gods and what the black gods is really about, which we're going to get into in this video as well. They didn't want the people to understand that, so they took it away. They took it away because it leads to the understanding of melanin and the understanding of Kundalini energy and what all that stuff is about. Now, when you go and you look at, China, Thailand, all these Asian countries, they represent the dragon. They celebrate the snake, the serpent, and the dragon. You see it all throughout Asia, celebrated. They have the year of the dragon, in China. I mean, it's just a big celebration. So a lot of these people celebrate, and they celebrate, the dragon, they celebrate the serpent. And a lot of them don't really understand what this stuff's about. And a lot of them have no clue that it goes back to melanin and black gods. Now, I was talking about this at the end of the Moorish DVD about melanin and why it's important. I'm going to get into it a lot more deeper at the end of this DVD. So if you are European, if you're a white person, trust me, you want to pay attention to that. You want to listen and understand what this stuff is really about, because it really pertains to you in so many different ways. So now, getting back to this part, understand, of course, they sold out. They sold the people out, these rulers, in these Asian countries, India as well. And they sold them out because they understand that these religions go back to the understanding of melanin and real true spirituality. So, you can trace this stuff and you can do all the research. But of course, it obviously comes from Kemet. And anybody who is a real scholar, if you really do research like me, and like a lot of people, if you really research, it's no way they can hide this stuff from you. This is why we have entertainment and so many things to basically bombard our time and keep us from really digging deep, because I'm telling you, it takes a lot of time to really get this kind of knowledge and get to the heart of this stuff. I know I just spit it out in videos like, it's all in one book, but I'm telling you, it takes a lot of research and trial and error and really digging and doing research to really get to these points. And they know you don't have time for that. So, they think you're stupid. But anybody who has learned or who really does research can easily look at these gods. And when you start reading about them and understanding what they represent and their stories, you can clearly trace them back to Kemet. So, of course, if everybody in these countries understood that, wait a minute, these religions go back to Kemet, they will look more deeply into Kemet. They will look more deeply into the Egyptian mystery school and the Egyptian teachings, and will understand, about melanin, about true spirituality, about what this stuff is all about. And that's not what they want, of course. So when you go and dig into this stuff, I was talking about before how they went into Mesopotamia. This is 14th century BCE. They found these artifacts, they found these writings pertaining to Indian gods, and the writings is dating back to 14th century BCE. So one of the gods they found was Indra, which is an Indian god. Now this is Indra. Let me read this. It says, Indra in Hindu mythology, the king of the gods. Remember that, the king of the gods. He is one of the main gods of the Rig Veda, which is basically a Vedic Sanskrit writings, and it is the Indo-European cousin of the German Wotan, Norse Odin, Greek Zeus, and Roman Jupiter. Now understand that Indo-European, how they try to blend it in with these white gods.